I know. It's been a minute. Actually, it's been since September, so more like several minutes. But I'm really excited to be back with the first episode in a while. Hopefully the first episode of many to come. And honestly, back with a new direction for the show. We're switching things up, and this season is going to be way more conversational, more fun, and hopefully more insightful because of it. So today's guest is my very good friend. Julianna is a fellow spiritual director, and we have a lot in common. We both got our Master of Divinity degrees from the same school and the same program. We're both trained Ignatian spiritual directors. And in this conversation, we're going to talk about faith deconstruction and ultimately what it means to keep believing, not in certainty, but in possibility. We're going to talk about grief, anger, hope, and why new life keeps showing up in the most unexpected places. So let's get right to it. It could be helpful I would love to hear it. And then that way people know who you are on the podcast, just why you're here. Why would I invite you to be on this? So
just for fun, just to see what happens, So yeah, I don't mind.
Leave all your trauma out of it though.
Yeah. Purely positive things. Yep. No formative experiences here. Yeah, I haven't thought about it in a while, like how I would go about kind of organizing it. I used to talk about it as kind of before and after a crater came crashing down. And over the years, the metaphor that I've used has changed a bit from a crater, like a meteor crashing down, forming a crater, and has become kind of more this imagery of, I feel like I grew up in this like really nice, polished city, right? And this is all kind of within the realm of my experience of faith. And so it's like, I knew what was expected of me. I knew what the expectations were of, okay, this is how you're going to, read your Bible. This is how you're going to volunteer. This is how you're going to talk to your friends or how you're going to act at school. And particularly in high school, I became really, really good at it. And I loved it. It wasn't just about like, let me put on a good face or impress anyone. I loved it. I loved that on Sundays I would, go to the 9:30 service, and then I would volunteer to teach, a first grade class during the 11:30 service. And then I would run down to like the Wawa down the street and get a sub and go back and start setting up for middle school youth group, and then kind of hang around and be present, and then attend high school. Said something I couldn't hear.
Wawa's been around that long? I thought it was a new thing.
Oh, yes. Wawa, the iconic best gas station. I don't care about Buc-ee's. Listen, Buc-ee's is cool.
I mean, if you're the kind of person who's into gas stations, it's cool.
When it comes to Wawa,
all right. I thought it was new, so I've learned something new already.
Interesting. No, Wawa's been around at least for as long as I've been alive. I've always known.
Okay.
I've always known the.
All right. Maybe they're just making their way towards
in my county,
towards my neck of the woods.
Yeah, they are very East Coast. My cousin, they're kind of like mid-Atlantic East Coast. At least when I was growing up, because my cousin in Florida had no idea what they were growing up, and it's the whole thing.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt your story
so
for.
Wawa.
Tangent about Wawa, so
That's
are.
what the people are here for. Okay, all this faith stuff, whatever. Where can we get a sub? Where can we go in between watching first graders and helping sub sixth graders?
Yeah. Is it better than a pub sub?
I've never
had a sub from Publix.
That is. Oh, okay, Publix. Actually, no, I haven't. And even when I lived in Tennessee, the closest Publix was like 40 minutes away.
Okay.
So.
Well, you'll have to try that, and I'll have to try Wawa.
They had really good chocolate ice cream. You know what? Here's what we'll do. You'll get a sub from Publix. I'll get a sub from Wawa. We'll meet in like Richmond, Virginia. We'll be about halfway.
I do want to go to Virginia. I've been wanting to see DC and stuff like that. I haven't visited in a while.
Well, it's an
Isn't it?
exciting time.
Yes.
Why not?
It's such a
Yeah.
peaceful time in DC. So we should definitely go
Yes.
go drink. Yeah.
Yes. Very serene,
Nothing happening at
nothing
all. Yeah.
happening. So,
Anyways, you
nowhere.
were telling a very serious and heartfelt story. So please keep going.
Well, that's all right. That's all right. So I was very good at it, going to Wawa, but predominantly being in church, doing all the things. Um, I remember there's one day, it must have been my senior year. I was homeschooled, and so I was taking some classes at a community college, and I was taking an astronomy class. And I remember posting a picture on my Instagram, in a Starbucks, of course, of my Bible on one side and my astronomy homework on like next to it on the other side, and saying something like, "Isn't it so cool how like God and science can work together? Like, isn't it so cool how you can study these things?" Um,
Oh, cool.
and okay, yeah, it's so cool, but like it was just, it was kind of like a science isn't going to
Yeah.
compromise my faith type of
Did you
type
have any
thing.
experiences where people really
Uh,
tried to make them fit for you?
what I remember, the only thing I remember is my dad pulling up a video. It
Yeah.
was Louis Giglio. I don't know if it was like Passion era, but it was one where it was some, big stadium filled, sermon he was giving, where the video on the screen was kind of about like, here's like the size of the universe. And so it was like, here's Earth, and then here's this other thing, and here's this other thing, and just how expansive it is. And then he started talking about, and here's this clip, here's this sound that the universe makes. And he starts playing it. And I don't remember exactly what it sounded like, but then he starts playing with it the song, like, How Great Is Our God? And
Of
they
course.
perfectly line up and they complement each other so well. Um, and
I'm
that's
pretty
probably
sure I
one of the
saw
things
that
I
live
remember most of like, and see, like,
because I think
oh my
I was
gosh, you
there.
were
No, I think
there.
Chris Tomlin did, like a tour, and I'm pretty sure he had
Mm-hmm.
Louis Giglio come along because uh, they're buddies. So, anyways, yeah, I remember that. I remember, um, I remember being in a chapel and having this guy get up and tried to explain how it was like astronomy is what made me, you sharing that, what made me think of it, trying to explain how if you chart the stars back a certain, 2000 years, then there is scientific evidence for the star that, shine down on Bethlehem and just different things like that. And even at the time I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think you're missing the point of that brief narrative there, my
Right.
guy. And I wasn't even, I was probably like 19,
Mm-hmm.
20 then. Hadn't really thought very deeply about all this stuff anyways at that point. But anyways, I just made me think of how there was people all throughout high school and college who seemed to really try to like force these things to work together, which
Mm-hmm.
I think there's ways in which it does work together. It's like, yeah, this doesn't contradict. This is fine. But that sometimes people force it, I think, like cutting off a piece of the puzzle to
Right. It's
make those
kind of like,
pieces fit together or something like that.
mhm. Right, right. It's like you can either, vehemently deny that, what science says is true. Evolution, classic example, right? You can either be like, no, there is no such thing as evolution because it was whatever. It was how God exactly did all of it within a set 7-day period. So it's either, no, we don't interact, or we take all of these like vast things and we really like make sure that they're perfectly in line. And I think the Louis Giglio thing also talked about how there's something in our bodies, like like on the molecular level, with like essentially the glue of the body, like what holds cells together, is like in the shape of a
Mhm.
cross. And it was like, see, like Christ holds
Oh
all
my
things
gosh.
together, even in your blood.
Oh my gosh. Well, I I just don't know. That's
I'm not a
indescribable.
scientist. Who's to say?
It's indescribable. which that was a joke because that was the name of that album.
I was trying to think of the next word and I couldn't remember it. I was like, oh, this would be perfect if I could remember
Well,
it.
if we
But
keep
my
talking
brain
about
didn't
this, I'm
help
going to
us.
break my rule for the podcast, which is not being too critical of anything and just, being hopeful
Right.
and optimistic.
Fair
So,
enough.
so anyways, you, like me, took the Instagram photos of your books laid out and example of faith,
Yes.
and
Yes.
this is what it looks like, and aren't these things cool, and all that stuff.
Right. And I loved it. And I think it had value. I think while there are many things that I haven't held on to, I think there was something valuable about how that period of my life, I was taking on faith for my own. I was saying, okay, well, I am taking astronomy because I love it. And I am wanting to study. Like I had this desire to study scripture in the way that it was being offered to me. And so like that was beautiful to me at the time. And that's why it was so challenging when I started having questions about all of it. So within the metaphor that I said I use, I'm in this city that's very clean. Everyone knows like where they belong. Everyone knows like you walk on the sidewalk, you go to this place or that place. Like there's no questions about like how things are supposed to work, except the one like big rule is like don't go outside of the city. Because if you leave the city, people don't come back. People don't come back from that. Then we have to like be really sad for them. Their moms are crying and nobody wants to make their mom cry. And like, it's just, don't do it. And so around my sophomore year of high school, this was in 2013, 2014 was my sophomore year. I don't exactly know what happened, but it all kind of came crashing down. Like in some ways it felt like I didn't realize I had started to kind of walk outside of the city, but then all of a sudden I was in this forest that I'd never seen before, and it was exciting because it was new, but it was also so scary because it was new and it was dark and there were sounds I hadn't heard before and I didn't know what was around the corner, and just really, really frightening in many ways. And because I had loved how my experience of faith had been, or especially for like that concentrated 4 years of high school, and I went to college for preaching and church leadership.
I can't believe they let you do
ministry.
that.
I almost didn't. I was the only girl in the church leadership part. There was 2 other girls in my year who I think were in youth ministry, but it was pretty uncommon. And I was pretty fortunate that while my university would not have made any statements about supporting women as pastors, as preachers, almost all of my professors were very supportive and very encouraging, which is not always the experience. So I'm very grateful
In some ways,
for that.
But
That's
found
also
that
part of
the Bible faculty at most places are always willing to go further than the theological boundaries of the larger university.
Mhm.
But at some ways too, they're only as progressive as they're allowed to be. So it's usually a little bit further than the university, but you go too far and then you might lose your job or something like that. So
Right. I don't envy the balance that they must have.
I've
to
never understood how they
strike.
were able to walk that line. I've always just been like, oh, here's the line, let's cross it.
Right.
Show me the line so
Which
I can cross it
line?
as
Who
quickly as
needs it?
possible.
Right. Like, I don't want to waste our time. Just show me where the line is and I'll just hop on over. Yeah. I think that partially what started me kind of meandering beyond the boundaries was that I was the only woman in, again, that church leadership major. And within my first week of school, because there are so few women who are, at least at that time, who were majoring in youth ministry and church leadership and preaching, the upperclassmen kind of knew who you were when you came in. They might not have really like known your name, but they had an idea of like, oh, this girl is in our program. And so there was one day I was walking across campus to like the cafeteria building, and this other girl was walking the other way, and I had no idea who she was. And she looked at me and she goes, "Hey, like you're a preaching and youth ministry major, right?" And I said, "Oh yeah." And she goes, "Oh, well, you know, women can't do that." And then just keeps walking. I found out later that she was also a preaching and youth ministry major, but I had no idea. Like I had no idea. I knew that I had never seen a woman be a preacher, but I actually wasn't fully aware at the time that it was a really big controversy. So like I wasn't in on the joke that she thought I was in
Oh,
on.
she thought it was a joke.
And I
Or he was trying to tell a
right.
joke.
She was like, "Oh,
Okay.
haha, like you and
Gotcha.
me." Right. She's like, "We're in this, you and I, we shouldn't." I was like, "I don't know who you are." But I didn't
Yep.
know there was a joke. I didn't know there was one. Anyway, so without like rambling too far about like, how I got there, I did. I started going, okay, well, if I'm a woman in ministry and people don't think that that's okay, then like what does that mean? And then what does it mean? I had lived a pretty comfortable life. So even as far as just general sexism goes, I hadn't really thought about it or considered it. And so then it opened my eyes to, oh, okay, well, if people in my life who are, leaders or authorities that I respect are saying like, hey, there's no wage gap. There's no like gender wage gap difference. And then I'm seeing these things that say maybe there is. Okay, then what does that mean? And if that's true, then what does that mean about the LGBTQ community, who I've always been told was not God's favorite, to put the opinions I was taught lightly, right? And so, well, what about that? Is that true? Or do I want to change my mind about it? Okay, well, what about institutional, like systemic racism? I've always been taught that that's not really a modern day continuing issue. Is that so? It's just kind of every question led to more questions, and I didn't know, because I had been brought up in this world of behave the right way to continue securing your spot. I was never taught how to engage questions. And maybe the people who did try to teach me that, maybe I wasn't in a place to learn it. I don't know, but the framework I was given didn't lend itself to not being afraid when questions entered.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience. Actually, it happened when I was like 7 or 8. It was like, man, if Santa Claus isn't real, then what about the Tooth Fairy? And if the Tooth Fairy's not real, then what about the Easter Bunny? And if the Easter Bunny's not real, is Jesus real? So, I mean, it was a slippery slope, which my, community seemed fine for me to go down that slope so far as I didn't start questioning Jesus. But all jokes aside, absolutely. You start to question one thing that you were always told, nope, this is certain, this is true, don't go outside. And then as soon as you question that one thing, it leads to, well, if this, then this. What about this? And then, I mean, that's a pretty...
Mm-hmm. Right, because once you realize, oh, I'm not so sure, and there was one time I was interviewing for a campus ministry job, and it was as my master's program was coming to an end, my master's of divinity program, that is, and during the second interview, they asked me, okay, what if a student comes to you and says that like they think they might be gay, or whatever their version was of that question. And in the interview, I said, I think that my role would be to help students think. So I would be happy to, equip them with, to have conversations, to have them have different resources to explore like this topic. But I don't think my job is to tell them what to think, it's to help them. And they, seemed fine at that answer. And then the next day I got an email that said, hey, I know you asked if we had any, other questions or concerns at the end of the interview, and I should have said something, but I didn't. And really, here's this, like, we need to know, the person said, I agree with you that the job isn't to tell students what to think, but we still need to know what you think about this. And so I sent them back, okay, well, here's how I've landed in like an affirming camp. I don't have any problems with that. And here's how I've gotten there. Here's, on the scholarship side, how I've kind of worked out, the scriptural language. And here's how I've thought about the cultural components. And ultimately I said, and also, I think if you really want to, you can make an argument for either side. I think you can look at scripture from a lens that lets you say, no, this is wrong. I think you can look at scripture from a lens that says, no, actually, I think this is okay. And so if the question we're really asking is, am I going to embody a theology that is loving and that follows like what I think is true about like God being a God of love? Or if I'm going to embody a theology that literally leads people to commit suicide, like, I'm going to go with love. Like, if I'm choosing between two options that I think you really can argue equally, I think you can like make things line up to feel like, you can convince people of either one. But I'm going to go the loving way.
Which is why I really don't like the word, biblical, and using that as an adjective to describe a position or an interpretation, as though, well, if this is the biblical interpretation, or this is biblical marriage or biblical whatever it is, then it's the right one. And it's like, there's all kinds of shit that's biblical. Polygamy is biblical, child sacrifice is biblical, slavery is biblical, right? It's like, just something being biblical, if that's your standard for, whether or not it's a good idea, like, you're going to justify all kinds of bad shit, which I think is, historically speaking, largely what has happened. So anyways, we could have a whole episode on that, but I think you're right.
Yeah.
You got the job, right?
It's just interesting, how I totally got the job, been doing it every years. No, they sent me back an email that said, thank you so much. You clearly have thought about this in depth. We are not going to continue forward with you as a candidate. It has nothing to do with your answer, but here is a book that we would recommend you read. And it was some book about not believing what I believed. Basically, it was like, I was like, okay, so it has nothing to do with that.
But if you had read this book,
like me to read this
you
book
would
about
you
that.
would. Well, now we're concerned about your salvation.
Right, but let's convince you.
Now we're concerned about.
Yeah. It was.
Yeah.
It was disappointing, and it's. And I remember as I was figuring out, well, what am I going to say back? In the interview, I wasn't trying to skirt around saying what I believed. It was just true. I don't think my job is to tell people what to think. And they didn't ask me specifically what I think. They asked me what I would do with this student. And so, as I had this email with the direct question of what they really wanted to know, I could have said something different. But then if I had gotten the job that way, I would have never been able to be myself and never have been able to pastor the students in the way that I embody what it means to be a pastor. And so,
I had so many similar
balance,
experiences coming out of the MDiv, and so many different interviews where going into it, I was like, all right, I'm either going to have to tell them what they want to hear so I can get a job, or be honest so that I can, live with integrity and minister with integrity. And I don't know the answer. I used to probably would have said what I'm about to say with more certainty about what I know is true, and I don't know that this is true. But it makes me wonder, if you are somebody in ministry who's gotten a pretty good theological education. I mean, it seems to me like we said, uh, if you're have a faculty position at a university, you're only as, you can only be as outspoken on things as you're allowed to be. And in my experience, working with and interacting with lots of preachers and pastors and ministers, a lot of them are way more open-minded and think things very differently than maybe their eldership or their leadership thinks too. And so it's like, how much are you struggling by having to hold back or compromise just so that you can be employed somewhere and continue to have and not necessarily is that a bad thing? I mean, maybe the mindset is like, okay, I'm going to hold back so that I can be here and do good, and it's not all about just always pushing the agenda. But I definitely think there's times where you need to speak out, and maybe some people don't, just for the sake of maintaining their employment, which again, it's not like, oh, you sold out. It's just like, hey, this is how I'm supporting myself and my family. So it's not entirely, yeah.
Right? There's a
Yeah.
real risk. There's people have real things at stake of, okay, how do I balance the things that are all here, that are all true at the same time? It's true that I don't want to, perpetuate this belief. And it's also true that if I lose my job, I don't know what my family's going to do. And if I lose my job for this reason, can I find another job in the church? And if I can't, for a while, I told my husband, I was like, I feel like I've made myself unhireable because I got very particular ministry education. And then I worked in a handful of food service jobs. And then I was trying to figure out, well, what do I do? Where do I go from here? And if you can't, if I wasn't going to try to kind of mold myself into something to get a standard, ministry job, then, I couldn't even get a job at a Barnes and Noble because I had a master's degree. They wouldn't, I was overqualified and underqualified for everything all at the same time.
There we go. Part of the story is how you prayed for years, and then one night God came to you in a dream and said, I know the plans I have for you to prosper you, give you a hope and a future. And then the perfect church came into your awareness, and they offered you the position that enabled you to be fully yourself, and now you're thriving. And that's the only way the story could end, right? Yeah.
I think that's a wrap. I think we covered it. Unfortunately, no. What happened next is I spent all of college feeling like a fraud because I was the only woman in my major. And my professors were very encouraging. I would get very positive feedback, a whole lot of encouragement. And, I had one teacher who told me that, I had an internship and I hadn't done all of the typical things. And he goes, the question is, are we going to give you a B or an A? And I think that, we're going to give you an A because, you're going to be one of the ones who goes out and changes the church. And that's so encouraging. And I picked the church I did my internship at because I knew that they would be the ones who could handle me with my questions. They were the only church I knew of at that time, in where I was, that I would be safe for whatever came up within me as a reaction to having an internship at a church. And that was just hard because when I preach, I feel more sure than ever about faith. That's the moment where I think, oh, actually, yes, this is in my bones. This is something that, that I'm really going to hang on to. So I would love that. And I would get positive feedback about that. And then I would go home and think, I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't know if I can keep living like this. I don't know if this version of God that is really focused on rules and doing it right and excludes people and is used for power and all these things, if that's the God that's real, then I'm gonna have to
Yeah,
walk
he's a
away
jerk.
from all of this. Right. Like I actually I don't want that. And so those were the questions I was wrestling with, the realities I was wrestling with. And I really continued doing that. I just kind of started in that 2013, 14. And then in 2019, I started the Masters of Divinity program. And really, I started because I did feel like it was time. I wasn't sure what to do. I was still really uncertain about faith, but I'd come across authors like Rachel Held Evans, who, especially at that time, was really, really helping people navigate, like, what do you do when what you thought was true doesn't feel so true anymore? And so I was feeling kind of encouraged, but also still very aware of how I didn't fit in any of the places I used to fit anymore. And so I started considering doing a Master's of Divinity. And really, I started the program at Lipscomb thinking that I probably wouldn't finish it. I thought, this feels like the next right step, but it might be that in 2 years I finish this program and graduate. It also might be that I get a semester or 2 semesters into it and I realize, oh, actually, I do have to let go of all of this. This actually doesn't work for me anymore, and I'm done. And it, like, for those, 6 years, 2013 to 2019, it really felt like every day was just putting off the inevitable. I really thought it's just a matter of time before I have to accept. At first I was managing a pizza shop is what my job was. It was a local pizza shop owned by a local dairy. They had an ice cream store, and then the pizza place was next door. I had to wear like a red gingham dress and a specific shade of red lipstick for every shift. And it was not my standard look. Let's just say that.
Is there
My
any
mom got a real
picture
kick out
evidence
of it
of
when
this?
I sent her I'm going to send around. I don't have any little Polaroids or anything on my desk. Otherwise, I'd pick one up. And so at first, I remember sitting down the first semester and planning my days out to the minute because I was managing the shop, and we had to do the certain amount of hours at a. I was actually at my undergrad university at the time for my. Oh my gosh, what was that called? It's not an
practicum?
internship. Field experience?
Practicum.
Yes, practicum. And then here's I'll tell you how midway through the program my husband and I ended up moving into basically an in-law suite that is at my parents' house. And let's see. It's a big pivot. So I'm trying to think how to lead into it. So I started the program and started being given tools to experience God in a slower way, in a way that was, more, you don't come into it with expectations. You just come into it with, okay, well, what might God be saying? What do I want? God, I didn't know I could want a specific thing from God, but what do I want in this? And so being kind of in tune with those more subtle things. And so there was one day that I was on campus, and there was a chapel service, and my role was a graduate assistant to the dean of chapel. And so at the end of this chapel service, the prompt was to spend the last 15 minutes that is normally within chapel and just basically do a prayer walk around the campus. I'm pretty much spent the majority of the walk just kind of being like, I don't really know about this. I'm not super praying for the campus, for God to be here doing things. I just didn't feel comfortable. And then, so basically I spent the whole time with my mind racing and just trying to be open to not getting in my car and going home early, trying to just finish the allotted time. And as I was, making kind of my final turn back around, I just all of a sudden heard, slow down. And I thought, all right, so that was me And I'm just gonna not think too much about that, but just in case, I'll walk a little slower. Not a big deal. I started walking a little slower. And then again, and I didn't hear like an audible thing. It was just like a very clear thought. So then again, just that clear thought in my mind to slow down. I go, okay. Funny coincidence. I made that second strong thought happen because I was thinking about how weird it was the first time. Whatever. Wrote it off, kept going about my day. That night I'm working at the pizza shop and I'm sweeping before we mop the floors, and I get a text from a girl that I used to work with, totally out of the blue, hadn't talked to her in months, and she goes, hey, I don't know if this is weird, but I just feel like I need to text you that it's okay if you need to slow down and if you need to not do as much. And some, just encouraging thing, but that was the main thrust of it. I was like, what a funny coincidence that on the same day, she's also texting me, it's okay to slow down.
You spoke in tongues.
Next day,
Yep.
I spoke in tongues. Crazy. The next day, I'm back on campus, and my dad calls me out of the blue. My dad never really calls me, but he calls me out of the blue, and he goes, hey, I was thinking that I know you're in school, and my husband had just quit his job to work at a coffee shop while he figured out what he wanted to do. So my dad says, I know that, you're in school, and Jacob's, in between, jobs and figuring out what he wants to do. What if you guys move here? Jacob can come work with my dad at my dad's mortgage business that he had at the time. What if Jacob comes to work with me? And I just think this would be a really great way for you to be able to slow down while you're in your grad program. I was like, actually, don't believe this stuff happens. And yet, I'm having this experience of this repeated invitation from fairly unlikely places. And so, in some ways, to me, I think that kind of symbolizes the personal growth I had during the MDiv program. Is that, I did it because I love school and the academic, preparation and things, and I valued that. But I also did it just for me, just because it was kind of like my last ditch effort of figuring out, was I going to stay or was I going to, reorient my whole life outside of everything I'd ever known up to that point. And there were just these different experiences throughout the program that I thought, okay, there's something in this that feels different, that still feels inviting. And I don't feel like I have to go back exactly to how things were, with that original imagery of, okay, so I'm in the forest and it's lonely and dark and totally foreign and I don't know what to do. And there are these people who every now and then were just coming up next to me, just kind of like holding a lamp so that I could just see a little bit and see that I wasn't alone, that there was someone next to me, that, the ground beneath me, couldn't see the whole thing, but it was there. Even when I didn't feel like it, I could see it's there. And that, there was some type of hope to keep going. And over time, the imagery, especially within kind of the 5-year chunk of when I started the master's program and then after, just continued to kind of expand of, okay, maybe there's a lot of life here. Maybe there are actually a lot of pockets of people who haven't set up camp here in some kind of they've given up kind of way, but have found that the forest is the whole point, that exploring all these things that is in life and spirituality, and that it's kind of all the same, and that, to have a meaningful life, they've settled here because this is actually home. This is actually how we're invited to experience life and each other and God and faith. And maybe that's beautiful. And so there were just all these little invitations that kind of added up to, oh, people don't go back because it's actually really beautiful out here. And that's okay. And it's okay that it doesn't have clear parameters.
But it's also dangerous and scary. And
even if sometimes
it's dark
Right.
and mysterious and anything can happen. And
And every now and then, we find those pockets of people to be within it, and there are these spots of and these bright
yeah,
spots within it.
I mean, I just think that that is true. And also, I think that that realization of being kind of out on the margins or being in the wilderness, it's really baked into the whole tradition if you're paying attention to it. Um, Even just in the narrative stories of like Abraham called out to do this wilderness wandering, Israel called out of, society to wander in the wilderness. Um, and just, I mean, John the Baptist, the prophets, Jesus spent a lot of time out there. Um, and there's really not a lot of insight in the scriptures that comes from people who are very comfortable with the status quo and comfortable within the structure and the system. You could argue that the exceptions to that would be David and Solomon, but then you could also counter argue that how much of that actually was written by them. And then even just in church history, like we've studied church history, it's very rare that we're quoting popes and bishops as people who had profound spiritual insight that carried across time, and we're still finding value from it today. It's like I don't hear a lot about popes in terms of their impact on the spiritual journey. I hear a lot about people who said, "This is messed up. I'm going to go live out in the desert." And I hear about, the desert fathers and mothers. I hear about St. Francis and Ignatius and all those guys, people who are just like, nope, the wilderness, the desert, on the fringes, on the margins, it's really at. And so, anyways, that's just, I think it's baked into the whole tradition, and yeah, I don't know if I could go back if I even wanted to. Sometimes I do want to, you know. Sometimes it's like, man, it would be really nice to just go back to thinking more simply and not questioning things and just being. But then again, would it really? Like, I guess not. And that thought process
Yeah.
doesn't take very long before I'm like, no, it's better out here, even though it's dangerous and scary and there's not a lot of things to really like hold on to. It's still worth it being out out at sea, and there's beauty and wonder to discover, but there's also danger and mystery. So
Right. And it
yeah,
and it feels more real. At least in my experience, I enjoyed how my faith was in high school in particular, and I haven't always been grateful for it, but I think at this point I am grateful for it. And it's still true that everything, even though there's less structure to what I experience now, even though there are more, ebbs and flows to how much I'm experiencing things or how much I'm wanting to do different things, um,
yep.
it does feel more real. It feels more vivid than anything I
I think a lot
experienced
about
growing up.
how my limited understanding is that like in Amish communities, they give people like a certain period of time to like leave the community and go experience,
Mm-hmm.
life out in the rest of the world and the rest of society, which is fascinating to me because, like you mentioned a little while ago, we grew up in, very restricted communities with certain set of beliefs. And it was not like, hey, at some point we're going to let you go out and experience this other way of being. And we trust that our way of life is so good that you'll just naturally want to come back, which I do kind of feel like is maybe the Amish mindset there. It's like, sure, go out, experience it, know what you're missing. And then you'll, if you really find value in this way of life, which we think you will, we trust that you'll come back to it. What do you think it says about a faith tradition or a community or culture that the only way they know how to keep people in it is to scare them from going outside of those walls and try to keep them inside? Because it almost says to me like the unspoken assumption that we know if people go out and experience other ways of being, we know they're going to want to stay because what we've taught them is not compelling enough to draw them back in based on its own merit. But I don't know. I mean, I'd be curious to know what you think about that.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think it's possible it's part of it. I think a lot about it is it's just fear, of if I don't say here are the parameters and here are the things to do and here are the rules to follow and here's how we behave, here's how we do this as a community, then what if our community disagrees? What if what if it's not clear? What if, I think part of it at a institutional level is
Yeah.
that there's money involved. We need this many people in seats because we need this many people giving money because we need to pay these people. I think some places, I think that is just, um, how do I want to say this? I think sometimes that is just the twisted intent is just to keep people there. And I think for other people, it's just like me trying to budget. I need a certain amount of income. I need a certain amount of things to make sure I keep my car, that I keep my house, that I have health insurance, all these things. And so, I think there just is an unfortunate mingling of, well, you don't keep a large group together by encouraging them to wander and do things their own way. You keep a large group of people together by telling them, here's what you have to do and what we can provide for you in return. If I tell you that you can do things however you'd like, that you can follow your desires and God's personal invitations, then I can't tell you what you get in return for that. I can't promise you anything, but I can promise you have people who can help you watch your kids if you're in a small group with other families. I can promise you that, you can feel like you're part of something bigger if you volunteer to teach the Sunday school or to be part of the greeting team or, whatever. Like I can promise you things in return for that. When you're doing the behavior that I ask of you, I can tell you what you'll. So I think that's in some ways it's just basic how you keep a group together. The other piece that I spend a lot of time thinking about just in life in general is in grad school we talked about, I think if I remember correctly, it's kind of like the definition of freedom within virtue theory. And so basically the premise is that we tend to think about freedom, especially in the States, as I can do whatever I want. Freedom is in this moment, I can punch someone in the face or I can walk away, right? And so, if I choose to punch him, well, I'm free to do that. I have free will. I have freedom. However, in virtue theory, what I remember being taught, the actual notion of freedom is the type of life you want to live. And so freedom is a way of living, a way of being. It's, okay, I want to live the kind of life where, I don't know, let's use a rudimentary example, like with money, right? I want to live the type of life where I can go on a vacation with my family for a week each year and we can just be totally relaxed. No one has to work. We don't have to worry about, pinching pennies the whole time. Okay, well, if freedom is I get to have this experience, then freedom also means I'm not going to buy a car that's $300 above the budget that I can reasonably afford. I'm not going to buy a new TV just to have it. And I'm not talking about the whole don't have a cup of coffee so you can buy
Oh
a
my
house, right?
gosh,
I'm
that
just
was
talking
so
about
annoying. I had people
practically
telling me that for
speaking.
years. Oh,
Right.
jeez.
Right.
It's
So
okay.
okay, let's not
Yeah.
take this too far. And there's something to say about, if you, our professor would use this example of if you want to be, a professional ballerina, if that's the life you want, if freedom is a life of dancing, of being paid, this is your profession, then you follow a certain diet, you follow a certain practice, rehearsal regimen, you do your stretches every night, you learn how to put your hair up in a bun, you do all these things so that you
Yeah.
can live into that time. And so I think that's part of it too. I think there's this idea that freedom is, I get to choose to follow all of these rules for the sake of following these rules, or I choose not to,
Yeah.
and then I get kicked out of the camp. When freedom actually is, what kind of
Yeah.
life do we want to live together as a community? What kind of life do I want to have as an individual? Do I want to have a life where I'm worried about checking off all the boxes and doing everything right? Or do I want to have a life where I actually experience the fullness of the
Yeah.
gift of
Yeah.
being human?
I hear you kind of describing the difference between this idea of freedom being, well, I'm going to do what I want, when I want, wherever I want, because I want to. But what you're actually describing there is being a slave to your impulses. And I mean, sure, it feels good in the moment to give into an impulse, but when you stop and think about it, at least when I stop and think about it, it's not, and sometimes it is, but my momentary impulses are not always aligned with what my actual values are. And in fact, if I want to live the life I want to live the life that's most aligned with my values. I actually have to say no to my momentary impulses, my instant gratification impulses, and I have to discipline myself and even sometimes submit myself to the will or the guidelines or the boundaries of other people or communities or things like that, so that my higher values, what's most true about me, can be embodied and expressed in my daily life. Um, and I think that you're right. I think if you're not careful, you can say, "Oh, well, religious communities are too constricting because they do have statements of faith. This is what we believe, and they do have ethical codes. Like if you're a Christian, hopefully your ethics largely comes from the Sermon on the Mount. But I wonder if the difference there is that when you institutionalize something like that and you bring money and power into the mix, then those boundaries and those guidelines and those, creeds or codes for living become less about enabling people to flourish in community and more about maintaining power and control.
Yeah, that reminds me of there's a sermon I preached once. I think it was when I was still in undergrad, but it was about, I don't remember the exact text, but it's when Jesus is talking about like the purpose of the law and how the law like basically comes to give life. So like all of like the Hebrew scripture in particular, like all of the, the commandments and all of those things that they come to give life. And I was talking to one of my professors about it because the language is a little confusing. It's a tough passage to preach. And what he was saying to me was that in his understanding, what Jesus was saying is like the law serves as kind of these guideposts of sorts. Okay, here's generally where you go, that to be on this way of like that free, full life. But they're not meant to constrict. And I think so often we just think, well, okay, if these are the guidelines, then I should make them like even tighter so that I can't accidentally, it's the rules about, okay, don't have an affair. Great. Good rule. In favor of that rule personally. But then we turn it into, do not go to lunch with a coworker who's of the opposite sex to talk about work-related things, not work-related. I worked at a place where I did an internship at a church once where if a group of us were, going off site somewhere for a lunch, a meeting, whatever, if it was just me and like one man who were ready to go at the same time, we had to drive separately.
Yeah.
You cannot ride in the same car if it's just you. So we turn this good rule of honor your spouse, bring life and love and goodness into this commitment, this relationship. We take that rule about prioritizing this person that you've committed your life and your love to, and we turn it into a rule about your car. And so and that might sound contradictory to what I was saying before about like to live
have to be
this free
careful
life.
because if you ride in the same car, that could lead to sex. And the problem with sex is that leads to dancing.
Exactly.
We cannot dance.
Cannot dance. I don't know what it's going to take, right? For people to understand that we can't
bad,
dance.
Man. I remember can't be in the same room. You can't. And if anything like that did happen by accident, everyone was like, "Oh, I wonder what happened." It's like nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just we had all these extra rules because fear, like you said, fear. And some people do take advantage of situations, and there's bad actors. Yeah.
Right. There's a wisdom to be had about any interaction, but I think, because I'm aware that I think that can sound a bit contradictory to what I was saying before about, if you want a particular type of life, you will have things. What I think my problem is with the rules being about, how you'll act with other people, it's not really often that we talk about, well, if you want a marriage that is full and good and enjoyable and able to withstand hardship and struggle, then here are the types of things you do in your marriage with your spouse. Here are the ways that you bring life into that relationship. So it's if the goal is a type of life with your spouse, and then all of your actions have to do with how you'll act with other people, then all of your attention is on the people who you shouldn't be in a car with, instead of how can I express like my devotion and love for this person? How can I be part of this relationship? So the focus is different, because it's not a focus of avoiding a certain thing. It's a focus of tending to the thing that you're saying matters.
So on that note, what are you tending to today? So not asking you to give your confession of faith for the rest of your life or even the rest of the year, but what do you believe today?
Through all of the last, what has it been now, like 13 years, the thing that I've really continued holding on to is just how beautiful it is that there's always like the possibility of new life. I think like that's kind of the whole thing, right? Is, earlier we were talking and I thought about the Israelites, wandering in the desert, and there's a moment when, there's probably many moments, but we have a story of them saying, it would have been better if we'd stayed in Egypt. Basically, the slavery sucked, but at least we knew we'd get 3 meals a day. And I've been there, right? Like I've been like, man, yeah, like maybe I want to go back to how things were. But the promise there is, if you keep going, like like, hear, O Israel, I am the Lord your God. I'm the God who brought you out of Egypt. Like I have good things for you. I think we see that story over and over and over again through scripture. Exactly when you think that there's no new life, like that's where you can expect it. It's Mary standing outside of Jesus's tomb, and she's crying and telling this gardener, they've taken my Jesus from me and I don't know where to find him. And then it's the gardener saying her name, just Mary, and her realizing, oh, this is Jesus, where I didn't expect him. And so the deep hope of that, like this hope that can hold both like disappointment and grief and the possibility of new life, exactly where we're tempted to stop believing in it. Man, that's what I believe in. I believe in a new life popping up over and over and over again, in new ways where I don't expect it. And I do keep seeing it. I keep seeing it. There's about just over a year ago, my dad had a really big health scare, and man, it was like one of the worst experiences of my life. You know a bit about it, but it's this moment of deep concern and fear, and these images that aren't ever going to leave my brain, I don't think. And in the weeks that followed, when my mom and I, for at least a week, if not two afterwards, kind of took turns at night staying awake to keep watch over my dad, it was these moments of, he was sleeping, we weren't talking, but just feeling my love for him deepen just by being present with him and getting to watch these tender moments, and to see now, that in some ways his demeanor has changed, and he was already like a wonderful dad, a tender man, but to see him become even more tender, and to see how our experiences together are enriched. And so, how could a good thing come from such a scary experience? I don't know, but I always try to hold on to the hope that it will. Even if the worst had happened and he had died, and it took decades for some type of hope to become apparent to me, I still want to hold on to the possibility that it can and will happen. And I do believe in the value of that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, I agree with you. One of the things I can confidently say that I do believe in today is that pattern of life, death, and resurrection. And that is always a possibility. And that it's kind of the pattern, I think, that's the pattern of the universe. It's a cyclical pattern of there's always new life that is possible on the other side of death. And I think we all experience it, whether we have an awareness of it or not. But I do think that a deepened awareness of it and a hope for the possibility of it enables us to experience it more consciously. And the more consciously we do experience it, I think the more we enjoy it, the more we benefit from it, the less cynical we become, the less angry we become, and that we can move through life's hardest moments of death, grief, loss, disappointment, frustration. We can move through those things, not necessarily, not being impacted by them or feeling the depths of the pain that those have, but at the same time, holding on to a hope and a sense of love, and maybe a sense of peace that doesn't negate it, but that somehow in a mysterious, paradoxical way, we can hold them both at the same time. And, maybe people understand what that feels like. I imagine people probably do. If you did just a contemplative sit or a journaling time where you wanted to sit back and think of the moments in your life where you felt hope or peace or love in a really difficult moment that didn't, again, negate the hardship of that moment, but just kind of came up alongside it. I think that there's always more of that that's available to us if we believe in the possibility.
Yeah. And when we're tuned into the possibility, when we're open to it, we can notice it when it pops up. Because some of it is just being able to say, I don't know if there's new life here. I don't know if I'll ever think that this is possible, but I'm open to it. And then when when you're surprised by, like, a friend comes over and you laugh really hard, and you're in the middle of like some big thing of grief, but you have this laughter. The laughter doesn't negate the grief, but you go, oh, this was a little bit of life. And I'm open to noticing those things. And it doesn't mean it solves everything. It just helps us be aware of the full spectrum and remain hopeful, because we're noticing, okay, there are some other things happening here too. There is a whole spectrum that I'm experiencing. And it's a gift when the friend comes over and makes us laugh.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is the reason that no matter what has happened to me and no matter what will happen, I don't think I'll ever be able to get away from the story of Jesus, because it has mediated that truth to me more profoundly than any other story or any other mediator has. And I'm not saying there's not other, possibilities. Maybe there are, but just that story of the life of Christ and life, death, resurrection, hope, and this idea that love is more powerful than death. Not even maybe necessarily in that death has been defeated, which I guess you could say it has, but I think defeated maybe not so much in that it has been destroyed. I don't know if death has died or been, because I don't people are still dying, I don't have any disillusions that I won't die. I don't know if you were raised with this sense of like, no, we're the last generation, and if we're really lucky, we won't have to die, because Jesus is going to come back anytime. And so I remember really hoping for that. Now,
I think I just missed the window of the Left Behind series and things like that. I think my oldest sister was kind of aware of them, but it missed me.
I'm pretty sure I'm going to die. But I'm okay with that.
I'm really sorry to say that. I think you will too.
Because my understanding now of what it means that love conquers death is that death is not done away with. Death is transformed. It's no longer a dead end. It has been repurposed into a transformative thing through which new life is possible on the other side of. But yeah, I'm with you. I believe in that, and my engagement with that story and my trust and faith in the Christ, looks very different than it used to, and it will probably continue to look different, but it holds me to that belief in always the possibility and the hope of new life. And so it's a beautiful thing.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's such an invitation just for all the different types of loss we experience. I think my understanding of death and new life for a long time was, that it was just my physical death at the end of my life, and then that I would be resurrected, whatever that looks like, in heaven, however that
maybe so.
However that
maybe
looks,
so.
I'm not gonna know. But right, who knows?
That would be nice.
Who knows? And because who knows, it gives me this hope for the future, but then also goes, actually, maybe that's also what Jesus was talking about when he said, take up your cross and follow me, to people who are very much alive. Maybe it's, allow your idea of how you were supposed to be, allow your idea of how life was supposed to be, allow that to die so that you can see the beauty of another way. And so it's, this death of a dream, death of a version of yourself who you can't be anymore, or who who you've realized you can't become, or whatever, death of, I don't know, death in terms of just how your life is if you lose your job and then everything gets turned on its head. All of these forms of losses are, okay, well, no less brutal. And yet, if I can let go of how I thought my life was supposed to be, or how this particular thing was supposed to be, then I could become more fully present to what is becoming and be open to it, as opposed to just hanging on to what I've lost, which I think I hear you doing a lot within the premise of this podcast in general is, okay, it's not what I don't believe anymore. It's not the version of belief that I lost. It's not like the death of Zach's old way of being. It's, okay, on this side of having lost how I thought things would be, where is their life and goodness and belief and hope? And I think that's what it's all about.
Yeah, I think you could just bring in that metaphor of the stages of grief. And I think with this whole deconstruction thing, it applies really well. There's denial, and then there's there's the angry stage, which I think most people are just kind of stuck in. And then there's the acceptance phase, or I'm actually revealing that I don't have them memorized as the stages of grief. But you get what I'm saying, right? There's all these different phases of grief, and I don't think there's a lot of helpful guidance on what it looks like to, okay, like we grieve well. There was something that's been lost. There is something that has been lost. But the point is now to, and maybe in some ways we'll never stop grieving. And at the same time, the invitation is, let's move on. Let's move forward. Let's find life again. Let's find happiness again. We cannot, stay stuck just mourning what has been. Life is available to us now, and possibilities are available moving forward in the future. And that's what I'm trying to do with myself. Was angry for a long time. Even in ways I didn't realize that I was angry. I think sometimes the only ways we know where we're angry is when we're just feeling that very visceral, emotional reaction of anger. But I've noticed that all kinds of different ways that anger has surfaced in me in ways that I didn't notice as anger. Just a need to criticize, a need to share my opinion, a need to, I don't know, rehash things, just a need to be right, and a need to talk about certain things. And all have expressed itself as, unrecognized forms of anger. But when you move on from that, you realize that your interests shift a little bit, where your mind goes shifts a little bit, and the things you want to talk about shift a little bit too. And you move towards, let's talk about what is good. Let's talk about what is helpful. Let's talk about where we actually are, not where we're not anymore. And I think sometimes the internal life, that shift in your internal life comes out naturally in what you want to talk about. But I also think that in choosing to talk about those things and choosing to focus on those things, that leads your internal self to kind of follow that path a little bit as well. So maybe that's what this podcast is an exercise in, is forcing ourselves to talk about those things so that inner transformation continues to move in that direction.
Yeah. I was actually listening to a church service the other day, which is, I know, crazy. Which I don't normally do, but someone had texted, like a pastor friend that I know had texted me something that had happened with his church, and I couldn't tell if he was saying it happened to him personally or to his church. And so I thought, well, I'll just see, if he was there that next Sunday, because that would tell me that it wasn't about him, because there was no way he'd be at the church. Anyway, so as he was preaching, he was talking about how there had been a lot of death in the church during that, I think just the week, but 2 weeks before, of just people from all ages. Someone's grandfather had died, someone's sibling had died. There was a family who lost a baby within like a day after the baby was born that week. And this church it was actually really beautiful to watch, like, these church leaders be legitimately emotional. And, they would say, if we have any visitors here, like, we're really not normally like this. We're just really hurting. And at one point, the pastor in his sermon says, like, we're not normally like this. And also we are normally like this because like we do care. And anyway, he gets to the end of the sermon and he says, okay, we're going to sing a few songs and, you can sing along with them. And if there are things in here that you can't sing, that you can't believe, then like let them be a prayer. And if you can't believe them and you can't let them be a prayer, then just try to like physically turn yourself towards, I assume they have a cross in the room, but like turn towards Jesus and just, have that physical turning. And that just came to mind as you were talking then of, within that internal thing of, okay, sometimes I can't believe it. Sometimes I can't even pray it. And I'm trying to orient myself and my life in such a way that I'm at least open to it. And so like that spectrum is okay. Anywhere that you fall from enthusiastic confidence to I'll turn one foot towards it, but I'm not turning both. Like wherever you fall, man, that's the experience of faith as a human being. And that's
and I love that. I think that's what faith really is, at least for me now, and maybe it's something else for other people. I'm not going to try to tell people what it definitely is or isn't anymore. But for me now, it's not belief in the certainty of something. It's a willingness to believe in the possibility of something. And I do think that is more so a choice than it is just whatever it happens to be that you are convinced of on a day-to-day basis. And so even on days when, maybe I'm just like, I don't know if any of this is real, which sometimes I feel that way, sorry if that's upsetting or shocking to anybody to hear that, but
I'm actually
I know.
personally offended, but
I just,
you can keep going. It's fine.
I would encourage everyone to be honest with themselves and pay attention to themselves, and they'd probably admit that there have been times where they felt that way too. But on days when it's like, man, I don't know if any of this is literally true or not, I don't know if this is literally real or not, I can still say I have faith because even on those days, I can choose to believe in the possibility that it is. And I can choose to believe and live like it's possible, even if I don't know for sure. And to me, that's what faith is. And I think that's where the fruit comes from, is belief in the possibility that there is life on the other side of whatever it is that we're experiencing. And actually, I'm not sure if you're a fan of Matthew McConaughey, but his autobiography is pretty interesting. He's got this new book called Poems and Prayers, but what convinced me to read and get his poem book, which I like, is he was on a podcast and he was talking about a bunch of different stuff, and the guy said something about, belief in God and all kinds of different things and belief in the afterlife. And at one point, he just said something along the lines of, I think he was asked directly, like, do you know that it's true? And he was like, I don't know. I don't know, but I know, what I do know is I'll never regret believing that it was possible. I'll never regret believing that it's possible. And that line has just really struck with me. And like, yes, that's what it's all about. It's a choice to believe in the possibility of love and resurrection, because choosing to believe in that makes me the kind of person I want to be in the world. Even if it ends up all not being true, I'm not going to regret that I believed that it was possible, because it made me into a loving person, more compassionate person, more open-minded, more understanding. And I know that even if there's nothing after this, embodying those to the best of your ability, that's how you make the most of the only existence that maybe we have. So promo for Matthew McConaughey. That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. Now coming in. He's been waiting this whole time, but now we'll start our interview.
And we'd like to welcome to the podcast Matthew.
Yeah.
All right.
So crazy.
Come and join us. But I'll link that interview in the in the description if anybody wants to read it. But
Awesome.
anyways, well, any closing thoughts?
You know, before we hopped on here, I was listening to a message you had sent me, and you referenced a poem that I sent you about traveler, there is no path. So I did bring that book up.
Yes, please
Maybe
do.
I'll read that.
Please read
Would you
it.
be down? Right. See, I marked it in my book. So it's titled Traveler, There Is No Road. Traveler, your footprints are the only road and nothing else. Traveler, there is no path. The path is made by walk. As you walk, you make the road, and turning to look back, you see a path that will never be traveled again. Traveler, there is no path, only a foam trail, the sea. When I came across that poem sometime in the fall, I just felt so encouraged by it, because sometimes it can feel like I just want a path to walk. I just want it to be clear how to. At times I miss the structure that I thrive in. I thrive in structure. And I've chosen to keep believing in this expansive, curiosity, wonder-filled exploration of mystery. And so that poem just resonated with me of, it's okay if there's no path. You're making the path. And it's just a foam trail on the sea. It's not so permanent that you have to be worried about getting it exactly right. Because it just exists in this space, in this time. And I do think there's something beautiful about that.